So who wants to be a millionaire? That's a show, right? You want to answer questions, they give you money. Well, we don't have that kind of budget here yet, but who knows? Maybe someday. Until then, I'll keep making the videos. I made a video recently about how much gold it would take to put you in the top 1.2% of all global wealth. That sounds pretty straightforward until you get into it, because the foundation for the idea, well, it requires a little bit of math. What you do is you take the global wealth, it's a figure that Credit Suisse reports each year, and you divide it out by the number of humans, and then you convert it relative to the gold supply. So there's a few steps in it. And what we found is that there's a wildly uneven distribution curve. 1.2% of the humans alive today have $1 million or more in wealth. And those millionaires and billionaires hold 47.8% of the total global wealth. And that distribution of wealth among that group is wildly uneven as well. So when you do the math to convert all the world's wealth to only one form, gold, and you use the available gold in the world, well, being part of that 1.2% really only requires having a few ounces of gold. It's just over 4. Now take that up to the extreme top of the pyramid, and those few would actually have 800,000 ounces of gold. It's interesting. It's also a little bit ridiculous. Before we get back to it, if you're looking for precious metals, hit up SD Bullion. New customers even get gold and silver for spot. It's sdbullion.com/new. Now, really, the only thing that this tells us is where we would fall at various holdings. What's average, what's a lot, and that's all compared against global averages. Now, I think it's all pretty interesting, like I said, but most of us didn't start buying gold to compete with the Joneses, especially not all the Joneses around the world. We got into it to improve our personal situations. So at some point we need to bring it home. Maybe look at that 4 ounces of gold and think, yeah, but does that really make me a millionaire? So we're going to get into a few angles here, but let's just start off saying millionaire. That's just a word. $1 million of wealth goes a lot further in Ixtapa, Zihuatanejo than it does in London. And whether you're doing calculations on what you could buy today with 4 ounces of gold, or you were calculating how much an ounce of gold would have to be worth to get to $1 million, well, you're coming to a valid conclusion. 4 ounces of gold alone probably won't set you up for retirement. And what it will do, though, is put you ahead of nearly 99% of the world's population. 4 ounces of gold, it also gives you a fallback that most people simply don't have. The median savings for Americans is somewhere between $3,200 and $6,400, depending on your age. 4 ounces of gold, it's going to be worth more than that figure, even at the high side of this scale. Now, to be clear, though, I'm using median and average. They're very different things. A lot of people will use the median to say that X number of people don't have enough to cover X dollar expense. That's median. So if we were to look at average here, average is higher. That falls between $11,200 and $57,800. Again, depending on your age. As you get older, you have more in savings. Now, this is another example of the uneven wealth distribution. No comment on fairness there. It's just to say that average and median are different. The median is much lower than the average because that average is going to be skewed higher based on the few at the very top of the pyramid. Somebody pointed out the Pareto principle in the last video. That basically is the 80-20 rule. Look that up, or look up Price's Law if you want to dive deeper into that idea of wealth distribution. Now, a lot of that comes from creative production, but it gets into the differences between average and median in the real world. So 4 ounces of gold might not seem like it's going to go very far. It might not seem like enough to retire on, but again, it would be more than the median savings of Americans. Now, if we shift gears to what you can actually do with 4 ounces of gold, convert it to dollars for just a minute, we'll call it $8,000, well, that amount would cover the average monthly living expense for a single person in the United States for just under 3 months. Just under 2 months for a household. Now, for context, that same amount of gold could last a single person 6 months in Portugal, could last 7 months in Mexico, or 4 months in Costa Rica. Those are using average expenses for those locations. So now we have the context of where this puts us in relation to the world wealth distribution pyramid. That's based on gold supply, I did that conversion, and what that 1.2% level could possibly do for us specifically. Like, how long could we pay the bills with that kind of wealth? Now, another figure that came out of those calculations was the average amount of gold to get into that millionaire status, not just the entry point. Again, millionaire, it's just a word, but when you look at the average amount of the 1.2% of the world, it really starts to feel pretty significant. That number divides 2.57 billion ounces of gold by 62.5 million humans, comes out to 41.8 ounces. We're going to take out some gold that's lost to tragic boating accidents and probably call it 41 ounces of gold per person in that club. So if we use that new figure and we looked at those average monthly living expenses again for a single person, now we're looking at about 28 months in the United States, 20 for a household. That's based on those average costs. It's between $3,000 and $5,000 per month here in the United States. 60 months in Portugal for a single person, that's 5 years. 70 months in Mexico, or 40 months in Costa Rica. Now maybe we're starting to feel a little bit more like a millionaire, or at least like a very well-prepared person. I don't know how others do it, but I've always set goals built around possible emergency expenses. Now, I know my actual expenses. I don't have to use averages. I know what I'd like to be able to cover in a month. So I plan for $4,000 a month for my family, $2,000 just to subsidize it. Now that part probably doesn't mean much to you. You're going to have to swap in your own, but the idea of monthly expenses multiplied by the number of months that I want covered, that's how I come up with my goal numbers. So initially I wanted backup for 3 months, and that's what led me to that initial goal of 3 ounces. Now, coincidentally, 3 ounces would be the average for the next 11.8% of the global population. That's in terms of wealth distribution, again, converted to gold. So if I wanted to subsidize 2 years of expense, I'm using $2,000 in that month. It's not going to cover everything, but that's why I'm saying subsidize. I would need 24 ounces. If I wanted to fully cover those 2 years, I'd be using $4,000 a month. Well, that's 48 ounces. If I wanted 4 years subsidized, 48 ounces. Fully covered for 4 years, 96 ounces. And I know I'm using a lot of math here, but really I'm just calling an ounce of gold $2,000. I'm multiplying that by the number of months, so I'm using 1 or 2 ounces of gold per month. So just to get down into the idea of where that comes from, I've mentioned my scheduled purchases over the past 15 years. Actually, it's 16 now. I was buying a quarter ounce of gold a month, so 3 ounces a year. Now, on average, I was doubling that amount. So each year I would get about another 3 ounces. I would do that at cheap or convenient times. So in 8 years, I had those 2 years covered. That's 8 times the 6 ounces. It's 48. Now that's using $4,000 a month as an expense number. Again, that might be meaningless to you. It's just the number I'm using. But after 16 years, which is about how long I've been going on schedule, I have 4 years covered. None of this happens overnight. At least it doesn't need to anyway. It definitely didn't for me. That 41 ounces point, which would be the average millionaire according to the wealth distribution pyramid, well, that would take just under 7 years at a pace of 6 ounces per year. 13 and a half if it was 3 ounces per year. So it's doable, but most of us don't just snap our fingers and end up at that gold millionaire level. It's important to keep that in mind. If you're looking at averages, you're looking at pyramid tiers, most of us don't start there. And this is a big reason that I set goals based on possible emergency needs, 3 months, 1 year, 2 years, 4 years. That lets me know what it'll do for me personally. It's helped me far more than comparing my gold holdings to the rest of the world. But if nothing else, I do think it's interesting just to see where you stack up along the way to your own goals. So there was a lot of math in this one again, but all I'm really doing here is saying that even though it's fun to see where you land on a scale, especially if you add those tiers and those fun category names, the practical way to go is just to figure out why you're doing something. Then apply some goals that you can measure. To me, an ounce of gold is worth 1 subsidized month. 2 ounces is 1 month fully covered. Now, I spend more than that today, but I would tighten down. I was using the average expenses in the United States earlier. That was $3,000 for an average single person, $5,000 for an average household. So not far off from my numbers. But again, swap out for your own numbers, and this is all going to make a lot more sense to you. As for that Gold Millionaire Club, with 4 ounces as the entry point, 41 ounces is the average. I think it's great if you're there, but simply working on accumulating gold or silver, really at any level, is worthy of a good game. Just think of all the people who can't or don't. You're on a good path. So let's call it good there. Let us know how you plan this stuff out. Do you use goals based on use cases? Do you care where you fall in comparisons? Or do you just go after it? Journey is the destination and all of that. Let us know. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit the like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you'd like to see more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.